Hello, welcome to the Dear Nikki podcast, where I'm going to be giving you personalized user research advice based on your questions or struggles. So let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Happy February. I am excited that it is February because February is my least favorite month, and I'm just happy to get it started so that we can get it over with. Which is a really crappy mindset. But to be completely honest, living on an island in the UK means that we get on a very consistent basis gale 8 to 12 force winds in the winter, and that's anywhere from 60 to 120 mile per hour winds. And rain. And sorry, I am not converting to kilometers per hour. For some reason, Jersey uses miles per hour, so I don't have the conversion, but it's really strong wind. I will say very, very strong wind. 60 mile per hour winds are casual here. It's like, oh yeah, just a gust of 60 mile per hour. So I am excited for us to move through February and be in March, because for me, I'm like, oh, spring. Spring's right around the corner. It's a good vibe. February is just kind of a sad vibe for me. But to make February better for me, and hopefully for everybody else involved, we're going to continue on with this podcast and answer some awesome questions. So the question that I wanted to tackle today, when I first received it, I wasn't sure if I could answer it or the best way to answer it, because my answer is kind of simple. But instead of saying to this person, oh, I can't really answer this, or here's, two lines of what I'm thinking when it comes to this question, I wanted to bring this question up because I also wanted to see if there are other people who feel differently than I do when it comes to this question, because this is not within my area of expertise or something that I've considered, thought about, or researched at all, really. And so, yeah, if there is something that comes up for you when I'm answering this question that you wanted me to share, because I can share something in the next podcast. If something comes up for you, and you can email me and I will share your thoughts in the next podcast about this particular question. Because as I said, I'm not an expert in this particular area, and my answer is blunt, but I want to just talk through why I feel the way that I do about answering this question in this particular way. So I'm talking very vaguely and mysteriously about this question. So let me reveal it, and then I will talk through my answer. Here's the question. What is the difference between UX researcher, user researcher, and design researcher? I'm growing out my team, and I'm thinking about titles and what the roles and responsibilities of each one are. Would love to hear your thoughts on the distinctions. My first and initial reaction to this was, it's an awesome question, but my answer feels really dull for the awesomeness of this question, because my straightforward, as I said, really blunt answer is, to me, there is very little, if any, difference between these titles, right? So something that I find happens in the product and tech field, and also specifically in newer fields. So user research as a field is still relatively new when you look at other associated fields like engineering, product management, marketing, sales. We are still new, especially within the product and tech scope. So what happens, I have found, is when we are newer to an industry, so we're a new field, we might create distinctions between things or create different names for things that might not necessarily need different names. Or what we might do is create different names for things without properly explaining what the distinctions are between these two different concepts, right? So for me, it can often feel like in user research, I am using multiple terms to define the same thing. For example, a lot of people are like, what is the difference between generative research, foundational research, exploratory research, kind of this bucket of big stuff where we're thinking about big questions. To me, there are very slight distinctions between them, if any at all. I tend to call all bigger, I guess, discovery foundational research generative research, because to me, generative research means all of these things, right? So, but I know that people ask, what is the difference between exploratory research versus foundational research and versus generative research? And again, I believe that maybe we have people coming up with different terms for things where they might have thought, within my context, this distinction makes sense. Instead of generative research, I'm going to specifically call it discovery research for this, that, and the other reason, right? But these distinctions aren't widely spread. And instead, all of these names become buzzwords, and we all get confused about what all of these different buzzwords mean. And if they are different and if they mean the same thing, it's quite confusing. I get really frustrated with it, actually. Something that I got frustrated with the other day was desk research versus secondary research, and the distinction between desk research and secondary research. And to me, I try, and maybe I try and oversimplify things. Maybe I just try too hard to like stop there from being distinctions and just call something one thing, even if it deserves two different names. So that's why I wanted to share my thoughts on this, because maybe I oversimplify and I don't think deeply enough about these distinctions and why these things have different names. But with what I understand, I oftentimes get confused why it is that we call the same thing different things. Now, when it comes to these different titles, user researcher, UX researcher, and design researcher, I have heard and I have experienced some small distinctions, but overarching across all of these titles is you are a researcher. You are there to understand people and products, right? And to bring those together to help support your team in decision making. And that is using a wide array of methodologies, right? So it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. You can use interviews, you can use surveys, you can do usability tests, you can do card sorting, you can do journey mapping. You are also a facilitator that brings people together and gets ideas out of them. And then with that, you innovate, and with that, you ideate and you test and you iterate, right? To me, the responsibilities of each of these titles is exactly the same. Now, I will say that one thing that I did here that is a difference, that can be a difference with a design researcher, this is where it goes a little bit into that distinctive area, is there are a few different things that I want to cover. The first one being, with a design researcher, I have sometimes heard, or a product researcher, I have sometimes heard that this refers to a researcher who researches more physical products that might not have a digital interface, right? So like physical products. That is a distinction that I have heard when it comes to design or product researcher. So I don't want to completely disregard that distinction that I have heard. That is one of the bigger ones that I have seen in this space, is that design or product researcher can be about physical products rather than digital, right? Another thing that I have seen when it comes to all of these different titles is that at larger organizations, there can be distinctions between these titles. So what does that look like? As kind of within the names, A design researcher at a larger organization might be focused much more so on the look, feel, and experience of particular designs of a particular product. So really exploring more of that concept or evaluative kind of research. Whereas a UX or a user researcher would be more in terms of the generative. So understanding the users, right? The experience that people are going through. So more high level, like generative type of research. That is where I've seen the distinction come through the most, is within these larger organizations that slice is a terrible word because I'm talking about slicing people, but slice people into these different titles within their organization, because maybe design researchers have so much work to do within the scope of really understanding the product and the experience that somebody's having on that product, the look and feel of the product, and really diving deep into that particular area. Maybe they have so much to do within that space that they don't have the time necessarily or the scope to do some of the more generative, holistic, what are people's mental models? How are people feeling about different concepts? What is their journey throughout an end-to-end experience outside of a product, right? So the way that I think about those and the distinctions between those are in the context of a really large organization. Do I believe that we should have different titles for user researchers? I think that, and again, this might be me oversimplifying, we don't necessarily need these distinctions. The only distinction that I think would be really interesting and helpful is if somebody is working more on physical products, whether that means that they call themselves a design or a product researcher. I think that distinction is pretty important because it shows other companies or whomever maybe they're interviewing for other companies, what their specialty is, right? But for me, when it comes to UX researcher versus user researcher versus design researcher in the context of like a digital space, I don't know if we need the distinction. And again, maybe that's because I don't typically work at larger companies. I typically oversimplify things because to me that makes it easier, right? But one thing that I would say is, because this question was asked under the pretense of, thinking about what the roles and responsibilities of each one are, I would ask you, do you want to split up roles and responsibilities when it comes to your user researchers? So if we take that large company model and we say that design researchers are really only focused on the product and the design and the look and feel and understanding that experience, whereas user researchers are focused only on this more holistic and not holistic, but more user-based, journey-based, mental model-based approach, do we really want two separate people each in charge of those respective areas? Or is it better for one person or for multiple people who are user researchers to be in charge of the end to end, right? Looking at both generative and evaluative research, looking at both the more like broader concepts and mental models and journeys, as well as how the product fits in. To me, whenever I see people's roles and responsibilities kind of getting split up, I get concerned about career growth and stunting an area of somebody's growth. So if we take this larger model, and I'm sure that there are plenty of ways to work around what I'm about to say, but if we take this larger model and you have somebody who is just really focused on generative research, right? So we're understanding journey maps, we're understanding mental models, And then we have one other person who's primarily focused on more of the evaluative side. So concept testing, usability testing, and understanding how somebody interacts with a product and really evaluating that. Where do they get the other side? And that tends to be my biggest concern, because I do hear a lot of user researchers getting stuck almost in one or the other. And when they go for an interview where the role encompasses both, they feel really kind of uncomfortable, and they lack confidence in that skill that they haven't been able to develop because of the situation that they were in. Now, again, I'm sure that there are plenty of ways to work around it. You could rotate, and you could maybe have people coach others in the opposite skill set. So, coach generative researchers coaching evaluative researchers, and vice versa. I'm sure that there are plenty of ways around it. And I'm sure that there are sometimes reasons to have these distinctions. But what I would question is, why would you want to split up these responsibilities? What would be the purpose? What would be the goal behind it? What's the outcome that you're looking for? And how do you think that that might impact whoever you're hiring and whoever you're bringing onto your team, right? So, do you need to split up responsibilities, or should this person be responsible for both sides of research? And I'm just talking about qualitative research here. We haven't even gotten into quantitative research. So would this person also be able to have the opportunity to flex that muscle, understanding product analytics, understanding, surveys, and some of that quant based research? Because I would think that if we were to go to that larger corporation model where design researchers are focused more on the product, they might have a much better handle over reviewing product analytics than a researcher who's focused solely on concepts or mental models and really, really big questions, right? So I think that instead of thinking too much about what should be what, I would first start with, what are the things that I want people to be doing? What are the responsibilities? What do I want people to be able to do? And is it okay to ask one person to do this? I mean, as a researcher, I'm very comfortable holding both sides, generative and evaluative. However, if you're my manager and you're growing a team and you're saying you are going to be so overwhelmed with all of the work that you have to do just about the product, I don't even want to introduce generative research to you, or like that, those other types of research like journey mapping and stuff, then yeah, do I appreciate my manager setting me up for success in a way that means that I'm not overwhelmed and burnt out? And so there are two types of researchers in our organization. Sure, as long as I am getting experience on the other side, because I know that there are many, many companies out there that don't make these distinctions, where I'm going to have to know all of these skills and be able to properly conduct not only design research, so not only like product based research, but more general user research in terms of these journey maps and in terms of these more general approaches like personas, right? So I would just think carefully about why you would be splitting these responsibilities up into two different titles and almost two different roles, and if that makes sense for you. And I would just go from there, because again, the way that I see it, there doesn't need to be a distinction outside of the realm of like, I work on physical products versus digital products. I think that's an important one, because the process is very different. And I think we could all learn both. Doesn't mean that we only have to be digital, we only have to be physical. I think we could all learn both. And I still think that there's significant overlap, but I do think that there is enough of a difference between physical and digital products to call that out in terms of a distinction. Where I don't feel the distinction is necessary is when we are working on this digital product, we are doing research, where our responsibilities are research. It's the things that I said earlier on in the episode, where we're researching people and products and bringing these together in a way to support our teams and facilitate ideation and iteration and innovation. And so for me, I would question why we need to distinguish these titles and make these different roles completely. But again, my 2 cents, sometimes I oversimplify things, and I'm very, very aware of that. So if this has struck a nerve with you, or if you're a design researcher and you're like, Nikki, come on, get your head out of the sand. There's so much more to this distinction than you even know. Please let me know, because I love to learn. I love to kind of understand these things better. And I'm happy to bring these thoughts and ideas into the next podcast episode. So please email me if you feel differently than what I just thought about and kind of shared with you. And if you have any tips or any information on why it is important to make distinctions between these roles and why I kind of am oversimplifying things, maybe. So, anyways, I hope that was a helpful episode. And if you do want to reach out, please do. I always encourage you to. And please submit your questions as well. And I look forward to talking to you again so soon. Thanks. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to hit subscribe and submit your next question. And I look forward to talking to you all soon. Bye.